Welcome back to the Donkey Vote Political Podcast for another interview. And today we have the honor of interviewing the Deputy Leader of the National Party, Senator Perin Davey. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Not a problem. We're glad that you've come on the podcast. It's a pretty esteemed podcast nowadays with a lot of famous politicians. I think we were telling you before we interviewed Michael McCormack and Senator Cadell. So we're glad we could have you on as well, and hopefully we can maybe get some more National Party MPs into the future. Maybe David Littleproud as well.
Well, if I can help you, I will. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So just before we start with our questions, are you able to give us a little brief explanation about yourself, just for our viewers out there who may not entirely know all your backstory, just before we get into the questions?
My name's Senator Perin Davey. I was elected to the Senate in 2019. I am based out of Deniliquin, which is in southwest New South Wales. I am, out of all 12 senators in New South Wales, I am the only one based outside of the Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong area. So I'd look at myself as being the regional senator. It's a big task. I know a lot of my colleagues do a lot of work in the regions, but I'm the only one with the office outside of that basin. I love the regions. I did not grow up necessarily in the regions. I actually grew up in Canberra. But I've always had a connection to the regions. My family have connections to regional New South Wales and farming, and I've just felt very much drawn to it. I've had a wide and varied career, which I'm sure we'll get into in the questions, but when I finished year 12, I didn't go straight to university. I took a gap year that actually extended for about 23 years, I think, before I actually started my first university course. It's a long gap year, a queen of procrastination, I guess you could say. But I took advantage of a lot of opportunities that came my way. I did a cadetship in journalism. I travelled around the world. I worked silver service in London, served at banquets that hosted the Queen and Princess Diana. And then I went to Africa and started my own catering company in Botswana, where I stayed for 3 years, catering for safaris, and found my way home and found my way into my first political gig as a media advisor for a Queensland senator. Did a short stint because I was only covering a maternity service leave, but sort of got a taste for it, and then went into government relations roles, working for a company back in Canberra, and then met and married a farmer, and here I am.
Great life story there, Perin. Traveling all across the world and that sort of thing. Just to touch on your time in Canberra, I believe was it your father that was on the press gallery in Canberra for a considerable amount of time?
Yeah, so my father, when I was born, my father was working for the ABC. So, and back in those days, the ABC used to make their young journos sort of travel around every 2 years. It was a bit like the army. So I was born in Sydney, and then he was posted to Port Hedland in northwest Western Australia. He was the bureau chief, they said, which was translated to the only journalist for the ABC bureau in Port Hedland at the time. It covered a lot of the mining stories. Then he was transferred to Brisbane, and then Canberra. By the time I started school, he'd been posted to Canberra and worked in the press gallery in Old Parliament House, and has a lot of tales to tell. But then he also he became a press secretary for a minister, and then worked his way up to what they called senior private secretary in those days, and then started working for the National Party organisation as the federal director for a number of years. So yeah, there's a bit of a tie to the Nats.
Yeah, so it wasn't just, I guess there's a little bit of a family connection to the National Party. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. there is a family connection, but it was never forced, and my dad never made me join or never dragged me to any of the political meetings. He made me stuff a lot of envelopes during election campaigns, and also we had the job of mowing the lawns of the office back in the day, child
Was
labour.
that paid or?
But he never forced the issue, and we had a lot of very intense political debates around our dining room table, and he always allowed all three of us, I've got two brothers, to make up our own minds. And I think they were actually quite surprised when I came back and said, actually, I'm going to join the National Party now.
And I guess maybe it could be a third generation national if one of your kids joins down the line.
Well, when I was growing up, I always said I would have nothing to do with media or politics. And here I am. And my children have both said they will have nothing to do with politics. But one of them is currently working part-time in a senator's office. So you never know.
You never know. Something could happen down the line.
Yes.
We'll now get started with our questions, seeing as that was a pretty long intro. So yeah, my first question to you, Perin, is how was your high school and university life, seeing as you had a 23-year gap year? And do you have any memorable moments?
Well, I did 4 years of high school in Canberra at a public school, and then I was sent to a boarding school in Sydney. And my public school in Canberra had no compulsory uniform rules, and I was well known for taking my shoes off all the time and being very, very lax with the dress standards. I'd walk around barefoot, and I also had I was very adept at delivering all my English assignments as oral presentations instead of written presentations. So by the time I got to year 10 and I was working on the school magazine, my English teacher actually said to my mother, look, Perin's writing is terrible and she really can't spell or use grammar. And my mother said, well, you've been her teacher for 3 years. What have you been doing? Don't tell me this now. So it didn't really prepare me well to go away to a religious boarding school with a very strict uniform code and very high standards. So I, despite English being my favourite subject, I was not encouraged to do what we called proper English or 2-unit English back in the day. I was put into the English in Society stream, which was probably better for me because there were less of Shakespeare and more of just colourful storytelling, which suited me very well. I did, though, however, manage to slide into boarding school. It was a different way of life and certainly quite intense, but it did make me realise that if I wanted to have options open, I needed to put a bit more efforts into my schooling than what I had done previously. I did get a score that allowed me uni entrance, but I had designs on being a great TV star, so I wanted to go to drama school. I wanted to go to NIDA or out to one of the drama schools, and I did a lot of auditions to get into those, but I didn't quite nail it, obviously. So that's why I took the gap year. I thought I'm going to come back next year and I'll wow them because I've got a year of real life experience to put into my performances. I just never got around to applying for that second year. And it was funny because while I didn't get into any of the drama, I was offered places in several universities in their communications in media courses. So kind of ironic that I said no to that and then ended up doing media anyway.
And that's kind of ironic as well that you said when you were growing up you didn't want anything to do with media and you still ended up doing media down the line.
Yeah. I think fate just had a plan, and it was like, you are going intermediate in some
You had to
form
follow
or
your
another.
father's footsteps, I guess. Yeah. So what boarding school did you go to after your stints at the public school in Canberra?
I went to Pymble Ladies College in Sydney.
Ah, okay, okay, yeah. Because my father as well had a stint in boarding school up in Bendigo because he's originally from Dandenong, and he spent like I think is it a term or a semester there. And he's told me a lot of stories about a lot of the boys who go up there because some of the times a lot of the boys who go to country schools, especially during his time, they were all kicked out of metro schools, so they weren't probably the friendliest type of people to be around.
Yeah, my school wasn't like that.
Yeah, probably the complete opposite.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Each school is different in its own way, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah.
We'll move on now to our second question. Tobias.
Yes, Perin Davey, you previous to your parliamentary comments, you run your own hospitality company in Boswan? I think that's how you say it.
Botswana.
Oh,
Botswana.
yeah, sorry.
Botswana in
Um,
Africa.
could
That's
could you
right.
could you tell us a little bit about your time in Botswana?
Yeah, I ended up in Botswana. I'd originally travelled to South Africa with some friends and had a great time in South Africa, and I wasn't quite ready though to come home at the end of it. So some friends in South Africa said they had friends in Botswana, and you should ring them and see if you can get a job with them because they ran a safari camp. I did, and at first they said no. We've got no jobs. So instead, I went to from the Cape in South Africa to Pretoria with another bunch of friends and thought I'd look for a job there. But by the time I ended, this was before mobile phones. So by the time I got to Pretoria, the safari camp had found me, tracked me down, and left a message and said, yes, actually, there is an opening. You can start in 2 weeks. I didn't even think to ask what the job would be. I just managed to find someone, a friend of a friend of a friend who was also going to Botswana, and I hitched a lift with them and spent 2 weeks camping with them as we trailed around, and the car broke down and we ended up having to get towed. And then I caught a local bus where I was the only non-Indigenous person on the bus, and got dropped off in the desert beside some gates that said Nata Lodge, and they said, this is where you're going. And I just thought, what have I done? I've got no idea what I'm doing. And I walked down this very long driveway and got to the bottom, and they said, oh, you're going to be food and beverage manager. And I just thought, manager? I'm not a manager. I'm like, I can do waiting and bar service. I'm not a manager. And they said, well, that's what you're going to do. That's what you're employed to do. So you either want the job or not. And I thought, the distance I had traveled to get there, I thought, I'm taking the job. That was a 6-month contract. And then I got another 6-month contract with another safari camp elsewhere. And then I started my own company because so many overland safari trucks would come through, and they just need someone to cook for the 2 weeks they were in Botswana. So I started my own company, and I'd freelance and just jump on with one safari group after another and cook their meals in the middle of nowhere while they went off looking for animals to take photos, and they'd do their game drives, and I'd be back in the campsite. And actually, often I would see more animals than they would, because Botswana don't fence off their campsite. So it would be me having to hide from the buffaloes, or me versus the monkeys who were coming to steal my eggs as I'm trying to cook omelets for them to come back from their breakfast drive. It was a great time. I spent a total of 3 years in Botswana. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, so you went to Botswana like straight after high school, or was it just a couple years into your 23-year gap here?
So I left high school. I did my journalism cadetship for 3 years, and then I spent 18 months in London,
Oh, okay.
London, Europe, and then 6 months in South Africa, and then the 3 years in Botswana.
Very well traveled then. But you've basically been all around the world at this rate.
Well, I do like to travel. I like to meet new people. I like to get out of the cities though. While London was my base in England, I loved getting out to the villages and sort of having a look at what I call real, because cities can be quite generic. You can go to a city anywhere in the world and there's similarities, there's high-rise buildings, there's neon lights. But when you get to the villages, that's where you see the differences and the cultural differences, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah, a true National Party MP at that rate. Even back when you were younger.
Yeah, even before I knew it.
Exactly. Yeah, so we'll now move on to our next question. So this is actually a online question from George, who sadly couldn't be with us today. But he sent you a couple questions for you to answer, parents. So I'll just play it.
In addition
Okay.
to your time in Botswana, you also worked as a journalist like many other national colleagues, working specifically for Mudgee Guardian, even getting yourself into extras on TV shows such as Home and Away, East Street, and Water Rat. How was that line of work?
Could you hear it, Senator?
Great. I heard it. I heard it. It was a great question. So when I came back from overseas, I found it wasn't as easy to get into work as it had been before I left. All of a sudden, university meant something, and I was sort of running around, and I didn't have a uni degree, and everyone's going, well, you're now competing against all these other job applicants, and they've got uni degrees. And it was a little bit demoralizing at the time, but I was also incredibly stubborn and thought, but I've got my cadetship in journalism. That is the same as a university degree. And, in certain times, the real life experience of actually having to do, I thought was very good. So while I was looking for a job, I was also in the Army Reserves. So I went back to the Army Reserves, which gave me a little bit of money. And I signed up with with an agency that just did extra work. And so I thought, this is my way. I didn't go to NIDA. This is my way to get discovered and to become the star I was meant to be. And I did those TV shows. I also did a couple of movies. I was I was an extra in Two Hands, and also The Matrix. So
Oh, really?
Matrix #1. Yeah, so that was filmed a lot in and around Sydney, and big scenes in Martin Place. So me and about 500 other people were all in The Matrix together in Martin Place in Sydney, and it was about just after I'd done The Matrix that I was offered the job with the senator in Queensland, which would use my media skills. So I thought, okay, now I've got a real job, and I'll just wait for someone to see me in the corner of a screen and go, who's that girl? We'll find her and ring her. I'm still waiting for that call.
Me and Tobias should go watch The Matrix again and try and spot you in the
Yeah.
in the movie if we can go look for you.
You won't spot me, but it's worth watching the movie again anyway.
Exactly, it's a very very good movie. So
Yeah.
yeah. So what so you met a lot of the Home and Away cast working as an extra there, didn't you?
Not really. As an extra, you don't necessarily meet the cast that much. I mean, it depends on the scene and who's in the scene and what the cast are doing as to how much engagement you have. Like in Water Rats, I did Water Rats a couple of times, and in one of them, I was actually placed so far back in the scene, I didn't even see any of the actual story that was being filmed. It was like 100 meters away, but I was there.
You're still there. You're still there. So you can still add that to your resume, I guess, that you were part of Water Rats, even if you didn't actually see what was happening and you had to rewatch the episode to actually see what was going on during that scene.
That's right.
Yeah. So we'll now move on to our next question. So you did briefly touch this question in your previous answer, but another line of work it's honestly quite a lot at this point that you did before your parliamentary days was being a reservist in the Australian Army. Are you able to talk a bit about your experience as a woman within the Australian Army?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I joined the army from a little town called Mudgee in sort of New South Wales, regional New South Wales. I joined because part of my cadetship, I was sent to the Army Reserve Unit, brand new section of a company that was setting up in Mudgee. So a section is only 9 people or so. And it was an infantry unit. And I went to do a story and I thought, this sounds really interesting. I want to join. And the lieutenant who was in charge of the section was really open-minded and forward-thinking. And he said, at the time, women weren't allowed to be infantry soldiers. But he said, well, if you really want to join in the infantry, we can have female administrative soldiers, so members of the Royal Australian Ordnance Corps. So he said, so if you want to do that, you can join and you can be our sort of clerk assistant or something like that. So I joined up and they were fantastic. I spent 3 years with, it was back then, 217 Royal New South Wales Regiment in Mudgee, and I did my Ordnance Corps training as a store person, and I also got my Army driver's license. So I became a storeman driver, and I would spend my weekends driving around. And because I couldn't be part of the infantry section, I got to play enemy every time, which was so much fun because as enemy, you can kind of bend the rules. And so I had all the same training as them. They all treated me really, really well. I had no problems. And I spent, so the whole 15 years I was with the Army Reserves, off and on, I was always attached to an infantry unit. And I never felt in any way belittled or put down. And I think it helped me because though I had to speak up to be heard, and I had to remind them sometimes that I was there and go, okay, I'm here on the weekend. What's my job for the weekend? Because they planned all their jobs for all the guys. And I'm really pleased now that the Australian Army allows women across the board in all roles and positions. And don't get me wrong, I do know some friends who had some difficulties in the army, but I never personally experienced any of that. But what I also did was if I didn't like the tone of someone's speech, or if I thought a joke was really, off color, I'd actually
Absurd or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave it. I wouldn't go away and stew on it. I would actually say, mate, don't talk like that while I'm around. And they would know. And so, they knew where I stood from the get-go. And I think that's really important, because if you let things go, no one knows that it was wrong or off colour or inappropriate. Sometimes people just don't think. They think they're being funny, surrounded by the lads. That's really funny. And if you stay silent, then they'll repeat the behaviour. Whereas if you speak up and say, I didn't find that funny, I thought that was actually inappropriate, often the first thing they do is go, oh, I'm really sorry. And then they don't do it again, or you hope they don't do it again.
Yeah, and I think that's a life model that you can go with in anything, not just, towards women in, certain industries like the army. I think it's in any sort of situation, especially, always speaking out and standing your ground, especially if, you know, derogatory
Derogatory.
derogatory comments are said about you, is always important, because, you know, you can't just let yourself be taken down like that, and just, I guess, let people overpower you in that sense. You got to stand up for yourself, and you got to do what's right in that situation.
That's right. And it's not always easy. And if anyone had have, you know, turned on me for doing that, then I would have certainly have taken it up to the next level and followed it through. And it's not always easy, but that's just the way I've always been brought up.
Yeah, and did you use a lot of the stuff that you learned from the Army Reserve in your political career currently, or would you say they kind of cross over a little bit? And yeah.
I think a lot. Unfortunately, you know, there are certain things. I did, though, in the army. I did the teamwork that you have to do in the army, and sometimes you're working with people that you wouldn't necessarily go and have a beer with. You're in a section of people, you haven't chosen them. They're not your friends. So, but you are in it together and working together for a common goal. And that is certainly something that comes into politics, because I don't get to choose who is elected. That's up to the Australian people. And even in the Nationals, I don't get to choose who is going to run for the Nationals. That's what our grassroots members do. And I just have to work with whoever they see as their best candidate, and make sure we're all working for the common goal. And that's what I do. And one of the great things I've found by taking that approach is you end up with these people being really good friends who you would never have met or had anything to do with otherwise, just because you know, live in different worlds. But and keeping an open mind and not judging people when they walk in the door, not going, well, you know, they're from somewhere or they've got certain background, and having a fixed opinion of them in your mind, but keeping an open mind and going, okay, this person will be interesting. Let's have a chat and see what they're all about.
Yeah, and I think something that we've kind of gotten as well from interviewing a lot of politicians over the past couple of weeks is the fact that there's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of, I guess, there's a lot of camaraderie between, you know, both the opposition and the government. Like, I would have never expected a lot of, you know, National Party MPs, especially, and Liberal Party MPs, to have such good relationships with Labor Party MPs. So it's pretty crazy to think, just because of the way, I guess, the media portrays the whole political system here, that you've got, you know, you've got Labor, you've got Liberal National Coalition, you know, they oppose each other on most things, and, you know, you never really get to see the sort of camaraderie and the sort of connection that, you know, both those sets of MPs have with each other.
And to me, that's one of the most unfortunate things about the way politics is played out on telly. You see Question Time, which is a lot of yelling and shouting at each other, but you don't see what happens, and particularly in the Senate, where so much is done by negotiation. If all we were doing was yelling at each other all the time, nothing would get done and nothing would get passed. Most of the laws in Australia that go through our parliament, most of them get passed with some form of bipartisan support. So there is a lot of camaraderie. And even, I mean, I walked into that place, to the Senate. I did 10 years working in the water industry, and Penny Wong, a former Labor water minister, had taken action, like had introduced policies that I was bitterly opposed to. So walking in there, I did not think I would like Penny Wong. But Penny Wong is someone, she garners respect. She is very smart. She's very politically astute. And she's actually quite a warm person. And the one thing I will say about her, you know, she's a shrewd politician, and politically she can cut you in half with the knife, but she plays the politics and the policy. I've never seen Penny Wong get personal, and I think that's a really important thing. Sometimes when you see politicians take a personal swipe at someone, then you know that they they actually haven't got the capacity to attack the policy, and I think that's a weakness. So I hope that I always only stick to the politics, because we don't need to get personal. There's enough people who are attacking us on the outside. We don't need to do it to each other.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people from the outside, I guess, don't understand how much pressure a lot of politicians are under, especially from media and that sort of thing. And if you're attacking each other on a personal level within Parliament, that's not going to really help you out at all. So I think it's good that you guys stick to policy, attacking policy, because that's basically why you're not there. It's not a whole like dramatization home and away sort of show. That's not what that's not what Parliament is in a sense. So it's important that you guys actually debate the policy and that sort of thing, not debate each other's personal lives.
That's right. And there are things that I will never agree with Penny Wong on, and she won't ever agree with me on. And the same with Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens. There are things we disagree on, but then there are things that we actually do agree on. And to me, and particularly when you bump into each other in the corridor, you focus on what you do agree on. And I've always said, and will always say, that people who are in that place in Parliament, they have put their hand up to go there because they want to make things better for the people they represent. Now, they might have a different idea on what that better looks like than I do, but that's why they're there, and that in itself should be applauded. And so I just think it's really important that we remember we're all humans. We've all got different backgrounds, different stories, but we actually have more in common than not. And that's so I focus on the commonalities, and then, yes, we will argue bitterly about the policies that we disagree on.
A bad call from the government is to go and have a curry for the
Go and have a curry for the country. Hey, I'm going to tell the Prime Minister that one. A curry for the country. I love it. I love Indian food. It's my favourite food. I promise you I will do that.
After a little ad break, I guess, and a little coffee break for all our viewers out there, we're back now to continue our interview and finish off the last couple of questions we have for Senator Davey. So our next question is from George.
Who would you say is a political role model or idol?
You able to hear that, Senator?
Yep, I heard it. Interesting, probably someone out of left of centre. Because when my father was working for the organisation as the federal director, the Nationals, believe it or not, were the first major political party in Australia to have a female federal president, a lady called Shirley McKerrow, who was from Victoria. She became the Nationals' first chairperson of any of our state parties, and became chair of the Victorian Nationals, or was then, in those days, it was the Country Party. And then she became chair of the federal Country Party. And I met her on several occasions, and she was this amazing, very well presented, very well spoken woman who stood with poise and grace, and she was very gently spoken, but she would walk into a room full of men, and they would all listen. And I used to look at her and go, with little teenage me thinking, I'm never having anything to do with politics, but wow, if I can grow up to be like her, that would be awesome. And unfortunately, Shirley just passed away only a few months ago, and her memorial service was held in Melbourne just this month, and I couldn't be there because I was actually I'm busy travelling. But
because you were at COP28, weren't you,
I was
Senator?
at COP, yeah. But I'm not one of the lucky ones. I actually had the pleasure of knowing and meeting my role model. and knowing her, and being able to watch her and meet with her. And I saw her recently this year because she's been living in Darwin, and I was in Darwin for work, and I took time out, and I was very, very grateful that I had the chance to sit down and talk to her. And if anyone knows some of the trials and tribulations of the Nationals or the Country Party back in 1983, while Shirley was president, or just as Shirley was coming to the end of her term as president, the Queensland Premier Joh Bjelke-Petersen decided he was going to be the next Prime Minister of Australia. And through all these challenges in the wind, and it's the most amazing sort of untold story of Australian political history about the Joh for PM campaign. So Shirley was in Canberra a lot, and having to strategise about how to keep the Country Party together and operational at a federal level while you've got things happening in Queensland and the other states all riling up against it. So a very, very astute, a very shrewd woman, and who was then, we've now had three female federal presidents, and we were also the first to have a female federal director. So, I mean, a lot of people think that the Nationals is just all sort of middle-aged white men, but we've actually done a lot with women, for women in politics, and I'm very proud to be part of that.
Yeah, I never actually knew a lot about Shirley, but you there talking a little bit about her time in 1983, especially with Joh Bjelke-Petersen. We do know sadly a lot about that that Pacific Premier of Queensland, but yeah, especially during that time, that must have been very hard to keep the whole party together, especially with Joh pushing his sort of views in Queensland, and you've got the New South Wales state legislator, and then you've got Victoria. And yeah, it must have been pretty tumultuous time for her. So it was very good that she was able to keep the party together, especially during that difficult time.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to have known her.
And it's great as well that, especially during the 1980s, there wouldn't have been as many women in politics as there is comparatively now. So, she was a bit of a trailblazer for her time, I guess.
Well, she certainly was, but as I said, and she told this story, and I hope she doesn't mind me repeating it. That she was in line. The Queen came to Australia, and all the dignitaries were lined up to meet the Queen, and they were all being introduced, and they got to Shirley, and they said, and here's Shirley Mackerrow, the first woman ever elected president of a political party, and she curtsied, and the Queen said, "Now, why is that?" And Shirley at the time said, "Oh, well, I'm not sure." And as the Queen walked down the row, she thought, "Oh, I should have said, because I was the first one to put my hand up." So,
yeah, she was a real trailblazer in that sense. And thank you for sharing that story as well, Senator. Yeah, so we'll now move on to our next question. Tobias.
Yes, what made you run in the 2019 federal election for the National Party?
Very good question. And there are multiple things that led up to that point in time. But I guess one of the key reasons was in 2019, former Senator John Wackett-Williams announced he was resigning, so there was a vacancy opening up. I knew it would be hotly contested. I knew there would be lots of people running for it. But I also, and I've learned from experience that if you don't ask, you don't get. We hear a lot that often people will rule themselves out of applying for a job because they sort of look at it and go, "I don't really have the experience." But then other people sort of look at the job and go, "Well, I've got a bit of the experience, but not all of the experience. And I learned the hard way once when I saw a job advertised, and I thought that would be the best job. I really want to go for that job, and I would be good at it. But then when I looked at the selection criteria, I was like, oh, there's a couple of boxes there that I don't tick. So I didn't apply. But then when they announced who got the job, I thought, I know him, and I like great guy, but I know more
You could have
about
beaten
the
him.
subject
You could have
matter
gotten the job.
for the job. And anyway, so when this vacancy came up, I thought, I can't let the same thing happen. I thought, I think I'd be a good senator. Maybe I don't have everything it takes, but I've got a lot of what it takes. And I thought, and if I don't apply, I definitely won't get the job. And if I do apply, what is the worst thing that can happen? They don't choose me. So, and the Nationals, so I put myself up for pre-selection. It was hotly contested. There were 8 people running. And when I was ringing people up and saying, I'd like your vote, some people were very honest, and they said, I don't think you've got the numbers. I think you're wasting your time. And one person actually said to me at the time, because of the coalition agreement in New South Wales between the Nationals and the Liberals, the year I was running, I would be number 3 on the coalition ticket. So there'd be 2 Liberals above me and I'd be number 3. And one person said to me, why are you wasting your time running for this election when you'll be number 3 on the ticket and the tide's turning against the coalition? Number 3 won't get in. You'll have wasted your time. And I said to them, but if I'm not prepared to run and lose, I don't deserve to run and win. And I still believe that. So, so I ran. I got selected. And then I ran we ran in the election, and number 3 got up against all odds. And now I will forever be number 3 if I keep putting my hand up. So I will forever have to put the hard work in and make sure that we get number 3 up on the coalition Senate ticket. But it's worth it. And I'm very grateful that I did apply. And to close the story off, the interesting thing, the guy who applied for and got the job that I wanted now works for me.
Oh. So that's a huge turnaround, I guess. He beat you out in one job, I guess, and now he's working under you.
Yeah, well, he didn't beat me because I didn't apply. I should have applied. But anyway, all these things, but they all happen for a reason. Because if I hadn't got that job, I probably wouldn't be a senator today. So
I guess with one opportunity closing the door, another door opens in that sort of sense. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And as well, especially in that 2019 election, there was a huge surprise that the coalition did get up. So there was a pretty high chance as well, Senator, that you weren't going to be elected. So
that's right.
So great job there for campaigning really hard and pushing yourself and getting the Senate seat. So, and I know as well, in a couple of years' time, you're going to have to go up again. So it'll be another tough and hard slog.
That's right. And the way we work in the Nationals, and I think most parties are the same in the Senate, you still have to apply, like you've still got to put yourself up for pre-selection each time. It's not, I don't just get to carry on because I'm the sitting senator. I've still got to put my hand up for pre-selection and put myself at the grace of my party and hope that I've done a good enough job that they keep confidence in me and keep me on the ticket.
And hopefully as deputy leader, they appreciate the hard work that you've been putting in these last couple of years. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Pity you're from Victoria, otherwise I
might move up to New South Wales. Who knows? Anything can happen, Senator. Anything can happen. So we'll move on now to our final question. So finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering university or high school?
Oh, well, if you're going to university or high school, enjoy it, learn, put the effort in, but also understand that in this day and age, life takes so many twists and turns. And while you might be going to study, say, engineering, in 20 years' time, you might end up being a senator, or you might end up like I know a social service worker who studied social service, worked in social service for many years, and is now running a regional development organisation, which is quite outside. So I think do the best you can, because it's about creating opportunities. So it's not about creating a single pathway, is what I would say. It's about creating opportunities. So if you're going into high school, if you finish year 12 with good grades, you've increased the amount of opportunities you could do. You might choose, like me, not to go to uni. You might choose, like me, to have a 23-year gap year before you go to uni. And that's okay. But it is about having the options available to you, because with options is confidence. Because if you know that one door closes, you know that there are other doors that you can potentially go through. And I think that is the most important lesson I can impart. Create as many options and opportunities for yourselves as possible, but also just experience life. Have fun, but stay safe. Don't drink and drive. Don't speed. And stay
You know
safe.
from experience, Senator?
I know from experience, unfortunately, I learned a very important lesson very young, but also, unfortunately, I have known people who didn't learn from the experience because they didn't get a second chance. So please stay safe.
Exactly, yeah. Always follow the rules and laws
Yeah.
abided by the government, please. We don't want we don't want more situations like that. So, and I think also something
Yes.
that you did touch on there as well, you know, in the current world we live in, like you'll have multiple careers within your life. So, you know,
Yeah.
this thing that you studied in university, 20 years down the track, as you said, you might be doing something completely different. So, and there are so many options and pathways nowadays to change careers and move into different fields of work. So, you know,
Yeah.
basically the world is your oyster.
And I mean, if you just look at my potted history and all the jobs I've had, but they have all given me great exposure to different things. You know, from being a barmaid in a 400-year-old pub in London and dealing with the different clientele there, to, you know, serving rich Americans in the deserts of Africa, to, you know, working with politicians as a staffer and now as a politician, and everything in between. It's all been amazing experience, and I just continue to learn each and every day. And everyone I talk to, I take a little piece and a little bit of experience off that. So it's all about always learning.
Exactly. The whole world is basically just a big book, and you're learning every single day.
Yeah.
All right then. Those are all our questions for you, Senator. I'd like to thank you again for joining us. For nearly it's been 70 minutes now since we started the interview, so I do really appreciate you spending the time with us. You know, the longer the interview, the better, I always say. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on.
So
and
do you edit it down, or are people going to listen to 70 minutes?
well,
It's more or less 70 minutes, because some of the previous stuff that we've been doing also.
yeah. So I mean, we've had actually some longer interviews in the past, so don't
Yeah.
worry, Senator. You're not
Yeah.
you're not the longest one we've had. So
You
I mean, it's better than a 10-minute
as I
interview.
wasn't- So long as I wasn't boring. I hope people
No, it was
enjoyed
great. It was
listening.
great. I think the viewers will enjoy the whole interview. So yeah, we
Great.
appreciate you again coming on, Senator.